Welcome to the Dad Central Show, hosted by Ed Gough Jr. and Drew Soleyn. We know dads want to see their kids succeed, but they don't always know how to get there. This show gives dads the tools they need to raise confident and successful kids.
What is up, everybody? It's Ed Gough Jr. of Dad Central Ontario with the one and only.
Really? One and only?
Well, okay.
Come on. That's a lot of pressure.
Well, maybe we'll have to go more. Maybe we'll go on after and see if there's any others. Well, okay, you know what? You are the one and only. Okay, you're the only one I know.
Is Drew Soleyn, Ontario. According to Ed, my famous co-host, I am the one and only. So welcome to the show. We're really glad to have you here.
Absolutely. And before we do any further, we're here for the Dad Central Show. It's sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. So, Drew, what's been going on? Talk to me. What's going on?
Well, our podcast is what's going on. We're getting a lot of requests to come on the show, and we're reaching out to a lot of people and getting their positive responses to come back on the show. So the podcast is what's going on, and I'm really enjoying, learning. I'm obviously a fan of personal development, and I want to have that personal development trickle into my family. And so it's a great pleasure to be able to have these conversations and really learn something every single time. So that's why I'm excited for today.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, the podcast is churning, more people watching, especially on YouTube. We are very happy about that. And more people listening on all the different audio platforms. So we appreciate all your support, but don't stop. Don't stop.
Please.
That's right.
Send us a review. Give us some feedback. Go to your favorite platform where you're listening and just subscribe and or like it, and just spread the word. We're really appreciative of the fact that you're listening to the show.
Yeah, and we're really excited because not only the feedback from the audience, but we're getting more people who want to share with us. And when I do these things, conversations, shows, I always look at it as a triangle. There's Drew and myself, there is our friend, our guest, and then there's the audience. So when all those three sides of a triangle are working together, that's when the magic happens for dads and their families. So let's keep it going. Let's keep it chugging. So Drew, we have another new friend with us today.
Yeah, today we're going to be speaking to Jim White. He's an author, a coach, and he's the founder of the Family Enrichment Academy. Jim is someone who I would love to aspire to be like. He's been married for 40 years and has 6 children, as well as 13 grandchildren. Now, 6 is a little bit high in terms of the number, but, sounds like he's got a wonderful legacy. So his background as a family enrichment coach and life experience provides a unique perspective on parenthood. So his book, How to Be the Parent Your Teenager Needs You to Be, is his second book on parenting. So I'm excited to have Jim on the show. And I think we're going to focus this conversation on his wheelhouse, which is parenting preteens and teens. So it should be really good. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking time, because obviously with those many kids and that many grandkids, when do you sleep?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, fortunately, they've gotten a little older, so it's they're kind of gone. Most of them are grown and gone at this point, so it's gotten a little easier from that standpoint.
Excellent. Drew, let's kick it off.
Yeah, well, Jim, normally we would like to ask some background questions, but I think what we'll do is you're an author of a book that says how to be the parent that your teen needs you to be. And so I'd love to, if you could just start by telling us what prompted you to write this book.
Yeah, and actually, to answer that, I might just give a little background. It's what prompted me to form the Family Enrichment Academy and sort of launch into this practice. And as you mentioned in the opening, I've been married for 40 years. And I would say I've been a student of personal development and parenting for those 40 years as well. But more importantly, I've been applying lessons learned as a parent, right? I've been going through and applying these lessons. And I actually like to use the analogy of a hero's 2 journeys. I feel like my journey as a parent is an example of that. And for your audience that's not familiar, I don't know if you guys are you familiar with the idea of a hero's 2 journeys? And it's a storytelling technique, right? And the premise is that the main character is on two different journeys. There's the outside journey of accomplishment. There's a goal or a task that they're trying to accomplish. But all the while, as they're pursuing that outside goal, they're also going through this internal transformation as well, right? They're becoming a different person. They're learning new principles, values, and beliefs that just make their life work better. Well, again, I feel like my journey as a parent sort of mirrors that. I mean, as you can imagine, having 6 children, there was a lot of stuff, for us to do, right? I mean, there was meals to cook, places to go, homework to help with. I mean, there was just a lot of tasks to do. But all the while, as we were doing that, through my interest in personal development and parenting, I was also experiencing this internal transformation. It was a process of discovering principles, values, and beliefs that just made our family work better. And what's happened now is I find myself at a point in my life where, again, I mentioned my youngest child is now 21, where I'm just feeling called to share some of the wisdom gained over those 40 years. And it's been an ongoing process for me. And so what transpired is I formed the Family Enrichment Academy and the coaching practice. And then that also, as part of that, I've written this book as to help launch and to be able to serve parents as well. And so I do one-on-one coaching workshops. I publish content on a regular basis as well. But the book's just a piece of this overall process of trying to share some of that wisdom gained over the last 40 years.
That's great. Jim, thanks so much for sharing that, a little bit of that background. One of the things that I'm really curious about, because it sounds like you have obviously a breadth of experience, lived experience, plus your own personal growth sort of passion. What caused you to choose to focus on teens?
That's a great question. And it just seemed like a great place to start because there's a lot of issue and conflict there. And to be quite honest, my long-term vision for the Family Enrichment Academy is to be able to provide support along all the different seasons of parenting, if you will, all the way from the beginning when a new parent through, and it's interesting. I've had people ask me about grandparenting, because I'm a grandparent now, and and being able to help parents as their children leave and become adults. And now that role shifts again. So my ultimate goal is to be able to serve all of those different seasons. But I just felt like there was a lot of issues right now with teenagers, and there's a lot of struggle there. And so it just felt like a natural place to start. And that's the honest answer.
Mm-hmm.
I want to jump in here. What you've been on the earth for a little bit of time. What is how is the definition of a teen today compared to maybe a generation ago, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's definitely shifted. And our teenagers, the children, they are engaged like a teen, and they're exposed like a teen maybe 20 years ago, much younger, 10, 11, 12. It's almost like that preteen, what used to be this sort of prep time where kids sort of tiptoed into those teen years. Well, now it's like they just show up and they're there. And so it definitely, there's been this expansion on the lower end, but also it's interesting on the older kids. In some cases, it almost feels like they get stuck in those teenage years and they have trouble transitioning into adulthood as well. So it feels like that age where it used to be, say, 13 to 19, it's maybe, 10 to 20, 21 sometimes now, where, the kids, they feel like they're in those teen years. So there's been an expansion of the age bracket for sure. And they're exposed to so much more. That's the other big, as you can imagine, the big shift, social media and just all the technology that's there. There's just so much more that they're exposed to at a much younger age, and they have access to so much more that's what creates a lot of the challenges, for parents.
Okay. I was feeling that as you were sharing it, but I wanted to maybe talk about this because I see that as a challenge or a problem that parents bear a responsibility for. May not be popular or not, but if we're seeing this expansion happening, I mean, what role do parents play in either supporting a child so that they're still not getting access to things that could be detrimental and causing them to grow up too fast or have these experiences, and on the flip side, what is the responsibility of a parent to then help the child grow and develop so that they are maturing at a reasonable rate and not bleeding into the 20, 21, 22 and still behaving like a teenager? That's kind of where I go. Well, I just want to put that out there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, and the first thing I would say to that, and I would say to all your parents, is to keep in mind that this is a journey and it is a personal journey. Every family dynamic is different, right? Some families have 2 children, some families have 4, some have boys, some have girls, and they all are different personalities as well, right? And things that happen as you move along. Let's say you've got a family of 3 and they're 10, 12, and 14. One family moves from one city to another. Well, that's a dynamic that their family has that's unique to their family that other families don't have, right? And so the point in saying that is that I like to encourage parents to think of it as a journey. And your role is to continue to develop and evolve and become, develop your parenting skills, and you're going to grow and learn. I a lot of times I tell parents, parenting is a personal development program for the parent as well, right? The parent is learning and growing as they go through this process. And so you got to keep that in mind. And all that to say, back to your question then, is every situation and circumstance is a little bit different. I mean, a 12-year-old boy's maturity level may be a lot different than the child next door, right? And so the parent has to be able to be present to that and respond accordingly. One child may be able to handle, let's say, social media, which that's always a big question, is when is it okay for the child to get a phone and to get on social media? Well, for one child, that may not be till they're 15, but another one might be okay at 12. And again, it depends on their maturity level and the family dynamic and what's going on, within that family. And so there's no like hard or set answers for these questions. It's a matter of being present again and having some fundamentals to work from to help guide your decision making. That's really where I try to point parents is, try to stay grounded in some fundamentals. And we'll talk about those, I'm sure, as we go along, that will help guide your decision-making process. And you know what? You're going to make a bad decision every once in a while. And that's okay. It's not the end of the world, right? And you just circle back and you reevaluate and you make a different decision the next time. And that's just part of the process that we have to go through. So I like for parents to also give themselves some grace as they go through this, because, you're going to, things are just not going to work sometimes. And that's just part of it. And being open and vulnerable about that with your teenager actually is a great lesson for the teen then, right? The teen learns, oh, you know what? People make mistakes sometimes, but that's not the end of the world. You come back and do something then to fix it. And you start to teach that by modeling that process.
Yeah, well said. So it sounds like the core of what you were sharing there is really knowing and understanding your child and working on that relationship with, I think you mentioned the idea of fundamentals, right? But it starts with knowing your child. But your example of a 15-year-old might be, more than ready for might not be ready for social media, and a 12-year-old might be. So there can be some differences there. That thing that I thought of is something that I use when I'm coaching people is this idea of comparison. And I think that's a big challenge probably for parents, is the idea of comparing what you see someone else and another person's child doing versus your child. And that I always say to my clients, comparison is a trap.
Yeah.
Right. You're falling into the comparison trap because you're getting stuck looking at the gap as opposed to focusing on the individual and knowing them and supporting them where they're at in this journey you're saying. So at least that's what it sounded like to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, everybody is unique. Everybody has their unique skill sets, and their process of growing and developing is going to be unique. And so we have to be able to work with that. And so again, it's like making in-game adjustments, if you will. If you come from an athletic background, you got to be able to have those fundamentals there to be able to make that adjustment and work with what's there. And I tell parents all the time, you may have a scenario where let's say the teenager newly has a driver's license and they want to drive across town to an away football game or an away competition. And today that may be a hard no, because your sense is they're not ready for that. Well, 6 months from now, they might be ready. And then now your no turns into a yes. And sometimes parents get stuck and they aren't willing to allow that growth to happen, and they don't let go of the hard no that they had 6 months ago. They feel like they're going back on their word in some ways. So it's important to be able to grow and develop and recognize as your teen grows and develop.
Yeah, very well said. Now, there's one point I want to throw out there, and then I'd love to get to those 3 fundamentals that you talked about.
Sure.
So the point was that sometimes, a parent may go to the idea of like helplessness, or, well, I can't do it. Like they're accessing social media everywhere. There's no point. And to me, that's where I struggle with that, in terms of it's always your responsibility, I think. And that's where I was coming from. Like, yes, culture is happening. Yes, these things happen, but you don't have to subscribe to that as a parent. You have the authority and the capacity to establish boundaries, healthy limits. And so anyways, I just want to throw that out there because I don't know, I feel very strongly about it. What are your thoughts on that? And then the 3 fundamentals, please.
Yeah. And it's actually, it kind of points to it, but there is this natural transition that has to happen. And that transition is from the parent controlling what goes on to turning over more and more of that control to the child. Mm-hmm. And because that child has to develop the ability to be responsible and to make the right choices. And the way they do that is by practicing that, right? And actually, that's one of the biggest sources of conflicts I see between teenagers and their parents, is the conflict over control, right? And I call it the readiness gap. The parent, they tend to underestimate the teenager's ability to handle a particular circumstance. But on the flip side, the teenager tends to overestimate their own ability to be able to handle a particular issue. And so you end up with this gap. And you mentioned the idea of a gap. And so but that gap is what then causes the conflict, right? But there needs to be, and I really encourage parents to start thinking in terms of, how do I turn over more and more control to my child? Now, the issue in a lot of cases is the parent says, well, I can't just turn them loose, right? That's where sometimes the parent, they aren't really sure what to do instead. It's okay, if I'm going to turn over more control and I'm going to let go of that, how do I then parent? What does my role become? And it's actually the 3rd fundamental that I talk about within the book. And it's the idea of being a source of empowerment. Mm-hmm. Your role as they move into those teen years is to empower your son or daughter to be responsible, to make the better choice. But it's a different role and it's a different skill set. And that's part of why, when I work with parents, is helping them to think from that perspective. And then, okay, how does that look different? How does it feel different? How do I act differently when I'm coming from that place of empowerment? So that's the shift that has to happen. And it's a continuum. I mean, I like to use the idea, when they're 12 years old, maybe the child has 20% control of things and the parent has 80, right? But by the time they're 14, maybe that should be 60-40. And by the time they're 16, maybe it's flipped to where the child has got 60% and the parents only got 40. But by the time they're 18, 19, and they go off to school or they go off and start their life, in theory, it's 100% on them, right? So eventually you got to get to that place to where it's on them, and they've gone through and they've made the mistakes under the roof of your home, right? It's a safe place to go through that process. So shifting from control to more of an empowerment mindset is one thing that I really try to work with parents on and help them make that transition.
Yeah, I really love that aspect, especially how you talk about the continuum over time. So maybe at 12, it's 80-20, but at 14, it's 60-40, and just giving you a way to see it. One of the other things I really like about that is the idea of helping children learn to make decisions with safety, right? Not beating them up because they made a mistake, but helping them learn from that mistake so they get better. And so I think of it as one of the main responsibilities of a parent is to help your child learn how to make good decisions for themselves. That's kind of what I think I heard you saying there around that 3rd fundamental of empowerment.
Right. Absolutely. They have to learn to be able to, to recognize and to trust themselves, trust and then it starts to circle back to their sort of core principles, values, and beliefs, that helps to guide them, and having them sort of tune into that, and having some sense of right and wrong in some ways. And that, and that's part of the parenting process as well, is to point them towards that. That's really the main thing that a parent gives to the child is their perspective, right? How they see the world and how they engage with the world. And it's going to be, a lot of it's going to be modeled over how the parent does, because they're going to follow along with the parent. And actually that the first fundamental in the book that I talk about is really for the parent to be very mindful of their mindset or their perspective. And the way I position it is I like to encourage parents to think in terms of, we have these two competing mindsets that reside within all of us, right? All of us have it. And one of them is fear-based and the other one is love-based. And whenever we are engaging and responding out of a fearful mindset, it always tends to damage relationships, and it causes pain and suffering, right? And on the flip side, if we can be mindful and make a shift into more of a love-based mindset, when we engage from that love-based mindset, it's going to heal relationships or build connection, and it's going to be a source of peace and joy and purpose. And so the first thing for the parent to sort of take on is this awareness and trying to be mindful and develop their ability to manage their own mindset and how they then engage with their teen. And my argument is, the more love-based, the better. I mean, that's going to make things work better.
Again, another simple but clear way of viewing your mindset as a parent. Are you coming at it from a place of fear-based, or are you coming at it from a place of love, and being able to stop and identify that before you're engaging with a child? Yeah, that's great.
Right.
Ed, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when we think about control, a lot of times that control comes from that fear-based mindset. We're fearful the child's going to make a bad choice, right? And they're going to damage something. And so we want to go in and control that. That's the response that comes from that fearful mindset. Whereas if you can come from love-based, it's more compassionate. Let's say they do something, they make a mistake. Your response is compassion and forgiveness. And then that allows that relationship to be healed, so that you can then move on to then empowering them, which actually I'll just go ahead and mention. The second fundamental is all around building connection. And if you want to build connection with your teen, that's where you got to come from that love-based mindset. That's when you build the connection. And that is just critical. And actually, I don't have scientific data, but I would almost assert that 80% of the problems that parents and teenagers have are the result of broken connection. The teen starts to feel distant, and the parent feels distance, between them and the teenager. And if you can rebuild and heal that connection, it just solves so many problems. Because part of the issue is when the teen feels disconnected, they feel isolated and they feel alone, right? And that's a scary place to be as a teenager. And the teen then starts to respond out of fear. And with the things that they do, they're afraid they're not going to fit into that group at school, right? So they buckle to the peer pressure to do something. That's a fearful response. And that's because the teen feels isolated or alone. Where if they feel that strong connection to home, they have a safe place to go. And it just gives them strength to resist, an example of peer pressure, something like that. So the second fundamental is all around building connection. And then how it's connected is, when we talked about empowerment, sometimes parents like the word influence. Empowerment and influence are similar. And my argument is, you can't influence or empower your teen unless you have a connection first, right? If that connection's not there, anything that you say or do is going to be thrown away anyway, because it's just, there's not that relationship first. So these three fundamentals sort of build on each other. It's that mindset for the parent, puts them in a position to build connection. Then they go build connection, which puts them in a position to then influence and empower that teen. So if you come from that perspective, those are tools that you can use no matter what the circumstance might be.
Yeah, well said. Well structured, and how it's all interconnected, right? But it's step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's something that we have definitely heard throughout the show, as we've done different guests, and really focusing on this idea of a strong relationship, and allowing things to build from there. But My my guess is there are probably parents, dads listening who may not have a strong relationship right now, and they have a teen who is maybe struggling. They're struggling with anxiety. They're struggling with fear. Maybe their teen is unmotivated. Maybe they're not being very responsible. I mean, I've got a bunch of questions I could just rattle off
Right.
to say, Jim, how do you help a teen who's unmotivated? Or how do I help a teen who's struggling with anxiety and fear? So why don't I just start with this one? How do you help a teen who might be struggling with anxiety and fear?
Yep, that's a great place to start, because it's amazing how much more common that is now than if I think back to when I was a teenager, or maybe when you guys were teenagers. And if you think about it, a lot of it's created, it's because of that social media and the technology. There's you talked about comparison earlier. What do they say? Comparison's the thief of joy, right?
Mm.
And the teens have all this opportunity to compare themselves to other teens, right? And then part of the issue is on social media, it's a not necessarily a accurate depiction of how the life is going, right? You can sort of make it look better than it is. And so there's this comparison to things that aren't real as well. But anyway, that, that's a big source of the anxiety and the reason we're seeing ramped up anxiety with teenagers. It all boils down to, though, them feeling not good enough, right? They don't compare to others, or them feeling isolated, alone, and left out. The classic example there is they see pictures and video from the party they weren't invited to, right? And so they feel left out. And that is the fundamental issue with anxiety. It's a lot of times they'll experience it at school. I don't feel smart enough. Everybody else is getting higher grades than me. But again, that's a comparison. Circles back to that not feeling good enough. The first line of defense for that is connection, and a very strong connection to the parents and to the family. And so, again, you can have a huge impact on that by building and deepening that connection. And actually, in the book, I have 9 different strategies for building connection. And it's there's a lot of ways that you can do it as a parent. As a father, for example, one of the big ones is just being present, right? How many times does the teen walk in after school and and they won't just say, "Hey, Dad, can I talk?" They're not going to say that, but maybe they give a little something like, "I don't know, I'm a little bummed about." You have to be present and recognize, oh, maybe I should be here and listen, and not be looking at my phone, right? Or not be checking my emails that are there, worried about something that's going on at work. It's a matter of focus and being present. And then I would add to that, be present from a love-based mindset. You want to be there from be compassionate, be forgiving, be grateful, those kinds of things. That's how you listen to what they say. Right. And at that point, and this is a dad issue more than a mom issue, dads always want to rush in and fix problems. Right. And a lot of times the teen just needs to talk. They don't need you to fix the problem. They don't need the advice. They just need a safe place for somebody to listen to them. And in reality, what's happening is, if something's going on, they have some negative emotion. Maybe they're feeling frustrated. They're feeling left out. There's some negative emotion going on. And the first goal is to provide a safe place for that negative emotion to dissipate, right? You got to let it just be able to get out. And that's the first goal that the parent needs to recognize. That, okay, I'm just here to be that safe place. And what you do when you do that is you build great connection, and the teen, it builds trust, right? The next time they're going to be willing to talk to you again if you're an effective listener, for example. So that's just one example of building connection.
I want to jump in here in regards to something. So, Jim, in your helping of parents and fathers, do you sometimes have to get the father to that point? Because we can't make the assumption that dads are just ready to put this into action.
Right. So, absolutely.
So I just like you to, if you want to share a little bit about just what about the fathers that aren't at that point yet? What are some suggestions you may be able to provide them that they may need to work on themselves before they get to that point?
Absolutely. And that's the first fundamental, right? It's kind of the father's mindset and the father's personal growth. And one place that I like to encourage parents to start is just, what are they experiencing themselves? And become really aware. It starts with awareness. it's kind of like emotional intelligence. One of the fundamental processes with emotional intelligence is the awareness. Where am I currently? And what I always encourage parents to distinguish is what I call fear-based experience or emotions or feelings versus love-based. If you're experiencing frustration, that's a fear-based or more of a negative emotion. If you're experiencing anger, apathy, disappointment, and a lot of times I'll have fathers, where do you go? What is it that you tend to experience? Because we all have differences in how we tend to respond. And so the first piece is to be aware of that and sort of catch yourself when you're maybe, if you're a father that tends to yell a lot and get angry, for example, what are the signs you're starting to feel that way? So just be aware that you're there. And then the second piece is simply create a pause. Try to stop for a minute and say, okay, I have a choice here. Do I want to make this shift to more of a love-based mindset? And it's about creating that pause. And you have to be very intentional about it and say, okay, this is something I want to practice. And in the heat of the moment, I actually have 3 questions I list in the book that help people in the heat of the moment. And the first one is, if you can catch yourself going down that fear-based path, create the pause. You say, who or what do I need to forgive right now? So that's question number 1. Second question is, what am I grateful for? What can I be grateful for? And that really starts to help create that shift. And then the third one is, how can I make a difference right now? So those 3 questions will help in the heat of the moment to sort of steer a person back to more of a love-based mindset. Now, and then the other piece though is, can you do preventative maintenance? Can I put this stuff into practice just in my everyday life so it becomes more of a habit? Because part of the problem is our fearful response. For a lot of people, that becomes the default, right? That's our habits have brought that to be the default in how we engage. And so part of the process is, how do I change that habit? It's no different than, a health and wellness habit. I want to eat better. I have to start practicing that on a regular basis. A simple example might be, whenever you walk into a building, consider that like a positive trigger. And when you walk in the building, you say to yourself, how can I bring some love and joy to this building? And you try to make that the habit, that you put that in your mind every time you walk into a building. And that starts to have you be conditioned to be more love-based as opposed to fear-based. So that's an example of that more proactive piece as well.
Love that, Jim. Okay. I think that's only good for parenting teams. I think that's good practice, just general human day life.
Absolutely. And it, whether it's your marriage or, anything, it's, being more aware, being more intentional about where you're coming from and how you're going to make a contribution. It just has a huge impact.
Yeah, I think that I can agree with that 100%, but I also want to maybe play a little devil's advocate here.
Sure.
I'm a dad who's stressed. I've got a lot of responsibilities. I got a lot of stuff going on. And that sounds like a lot of work, Jim, what you just described, especially starting with me. I got a teenager who I expect to be responsible, who I don't really have. I don't want to say I don't have, but I'm not sure, Jim, that I can do that. I can jump in there with what you're saying, because I just need to be able to come and have my child be responsible and take care of things and not have to chase them down and do all this mindset work. What do you say to that, Dad? Because I would imagine there's some
that comes up. Yeah, absolutely. And I would assert that it doesn't take more time. It takes your intention, because you're going to be engaging with your child either way. And it's a matter of, how do you engage with them? Another classic example is, and this will circle back to the other question about, how do you work on this for yourself? Let's say your child, you pick them up after school and you drive home every day in the car. And it's a 10-minute ride. That 10 minutes, you're going to be in that car no matter what. So the question is, how do you use that 10 minutes? How are you engaging with the teenager? And actually, one of the prompts or triggers is, if you know that happens every day, why not write an intention statement? Or you don't have to write it, but just for yourself, have an intention statement that at 3:42, which is 2 minutes before he walks out the door or she walks out the door, you say to yourself, my goal is to be present with my son or daughter for this next 10 minutes and just listen with compassion. You just say that to yourself before they get into the car. You've set your intention for that 10-minute ride. And then you try to execute that. Now, some days you may be effective, some days you may not. But if you make those efforts, what happens is you deepen that connection for the teen. As you deepen the connection, then you have influence and ability to empower them. And I would assert then that your teen that's not being responsible will all of a sudden start to become more responsible, because now you have that connection with them. And part of that lack of responsibility is them feeling disconnected. One of my other sayings I throw out to parents is that all bad or unwanted behavior is first a call for love. That's what it first is. It's a call for love. And it's because they're feeling disconnected. And so you rebuild that connection, you may find a lot of that bad behavior starts to go away, or the unwanted behavior. So, but you engage, you spend the time anyway. It's just a matter of how are you engaging and using that time. Now the parent has to be willing. It's very true. It's no different than, I'll use the analogy again of health and wellness. If somebody may say they want to lose weight and be more fit, but at some point they have to be the one that doesn't eat, right? And the one that goes and works out, And so if a dad, at some point they have to be intentional and take it on, that I'm going to grow and develop here as well in my skills. And what I'm doing thus far has maybe not worked. That's, something that when you have somebody that's unhealthy, his question is, well, how's that working out for you? Right. I mean, if you're not eating well, not actually, well, how's it working out? Well, it's not working. So I need to grow and learn and develop. Same thing with your child. I mean, if they're struggling, all you can do is try to grow and learn and develop so that you can hopefully have some impact on them going forward.
Okay. Again, I definitely agree 100%, but I want to put myself into the place of a dad who's kind of at the end of his rope. He's kind of frustrated. He's discouraged. He's almost going to say, like, why should I bother at this point? Is there something more in this that dad who's kind of at that point where he's going to say, no, I'm kind of tired of putting up with this. What's in it for him? Or what would you say to him to encourage him that, hey, keep going, keep trying, put these things into practice, because here's what you could be looking forward to at the other. What do you say to him?
Yeah, it's from a coaching process. It's a matter of, well, what's missing and what would be ideal, and try to get them to start to identify a more compelling future that they're willing to work towards. What would be ideal? Where do you want your child to be? Where do you want to be? And maybe it circles back. I mean, part of what you're describing to me may circle back to that parent themselves feeling disconnected, feeling isolated, feeling not, they're going through a lot of the stuff. And so, it's about them, and it may be a work related thing, or to be quite honest, a lot of times when I work with families, it's, there's as much work to be done on the marriage and the husband and the wife together. That has an impact on the kids, right? And so you got to solve that problem first. If it's not really a problem, it's an opportunity. I mean, it's a chance for them to re-engage. I mean, we all see couples that they start off, it's a love affair, right? But 8 years in, 3 kids later, they've kind of let that go. And the question is, what do you do? I had a dad that I was working with just the other day, and the challenge that we put out, and actually I did it too, was what could I do this week to surprise my wife? Something I could do to surprise her, to sort of re-engage that romance, if you will, or that, try to get them back. And then what would happen is, as you do that, dad starts to feel better about himself, right? And when dad starts to feel better about himself, now I'm in a position that I can go and serve my child.
Yeah.
Right. And so part of the end of the rope, maybe it's just more focused on him and what's not working for you. How can we make things work better for you? Bring some purpose and peace and joy back to your life. Now you're in a position, not only, and the awesome thing about that I would throw out is the parent, if he's vulnerable about that, is modeling for the child, hey, you're going to go through times like this, but you got to work towards being better. And you do that through personal growth and development. I mean, that's a huge gift to the child, just to watch their parent go through that.
So maybe we can go back to the idea of a teen who is struggling with those feelings of I'm not enough. What's the game plan for a dad who starts to recognize this in their child? How would you guide them to be able to help the child begin to see themselves as capable, as intelligent, as strong, as being enough?
The first piece that actually, I haven't mentioned this yet, a couple of my core beliefs that are sort of foundational to the Family Enrichment Academy, what we do. The first one is that everyone, including the children, parents, everybody, deserves to be seen for who they are and loved unconditionally. And that's the first step towards that, is you have to connect with that child. And even though you may say, I love you, they have to feel that they're being seen for who they are, and they have to feel that they're being loved unconditionally. And if you can do that, that goes a long way towards them then feeling good enough, right? Because they are good enough. They're good enough to be loved. And that's what you're communicating when you do that. And that happens through building connection. That happens through listening with compassion. It happens through being present. That, all of those building connection skills are going to help you to solidify that teen feeling safe and them feeling like they are loved unconditionally. And then that's the foundation. And then you move to the second kind of core belief, is then that we all deserve to be surrounded by people that lift us up and empower us to be our best. Right. And so that's the second step. Once is, okay, what is your strength? And you do it from a coaching standpoint or from an empowerment standpoint. What are your passions? What are your interests? How can we move you towards that? You start engaging the child towards their strengths and supporting them towards that. And having them be okay. Sometimes, if they feel different is when they feel isolated and alone. But again, if you can communicate that unconditional love, feeling different doesn't matter, right? I'm loved either way. But that starts at home, and having that sense at home is just huge.
I'm going to ask a question because I mean, again, I think that's spot on, and I really appreciate that message. Can love sometimes be challenging, or holding people accountable, or speaking hard truths in your perspective?
Yeah, it's I say yes and no. It feels challenging, but if you really are coming from that love-based mindset, it's purposeful, it's rewarding. You know what I'm saying? It feels good because you're doing it from the right place. The challenge is, when you think about conflict, for example, the challenge is because you're sort of you're butting heads, and it's a fearful, I'm trying to protect my interest, right, in a conflict, and they're trying to protect theirs. And it's like, are they really in it for me? Are they looking out for me, sort of a thing? And that's what happens a lot of times with teens. They don't feel like their parents have their back in a lot of cases. But if you come from a love-based mindset, you're really just there to support and to help. And if the person, it's interesting, what happens is if the teen responds negatively, my role, I'm just compassionate. They're struggling. I'm just going to be here and be compassionate and let them dump, let that energy out, because it's and I know I'm serving them at that point, right? That's what they need at that moment, is that safe place for that to happen. And then you can circle back. Okay, how can we help you take a different path next time or whatever? The ability to just be love-based helps to make it easier, if you will, just because you're always there in service.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
It makes sense to me. And so let me try and share something and see if this aligns with what you're trying to say. Let's say I have a teen who steps outside of the sort of expectations of just basic responsibilities. And in a love response, I say, this is the expectation. And as a result, you haven't met that expectation. So there's a natural consequence. And that means that, this privilege that is reserved for those who meet the expectations is no longer available to you. I empathize that it might be hard. You might be disappointed. But here's the thing. I know you can do better. I know that you got strength and capabilities inside you, and I expect that you can use those to the best of your ability, and you're showing me that you're not, so I have to impose this natural consequence or limit. Would that still align with
Yeah.
what you're talking about there?
Absolutely. And in the breakdown, and what I like to share and have parents share, is the idea that you've broken trust, right? That's
Yes.
part of what's broken. You've damaged the relationship. And the follow-up to that, though, the empowerment coaching part is then not just stop there. It's okay, what are you going to do over the next 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks to rebuild that trust, to rebuild that to mend the brokenness? And so you then coach the child into, okay, how do it's no different than if they break something in the house, it's like, okay, you did that, so you're going to be accountable for replacing it. How are you going to earn the money to do that, right? You sort of, that's a natural consequence from that. But if they break trust or whatever, it's okay, what are you going to do to mend this relationship? How can you rebuild? And the best part about that is a lot of times parents will, they'll punish sometimes a teenager, and the teen feels like there's no way to bridge, to go from where they are to where they want to be. It's like, again, I mentioned like a teen that wants to drive to an away game. It's like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that now, but let's put together a plan that gets us comfortable. And so there's some hope out there. There's some sense that, okay, I'm moving towards that goal. I know I can't do it today, but I know that if I do X, Y, Z, and we build this trust and I develop my driving skills over the next 3 months, then I will be able to. It creates a path towards a better result down the road. So that's the other piece of it, is then, okay, how do I coach them to make amends for whatever damage that they might have caused?
Well, Jim, you've just given us a whole lot of good stuff. And I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. I've really enjoyed this, and I picked your brain a little bit and put some challenging questions out to you. But to me, every time you've responded with great insight and great practical steps. So this has been great. Ed.
Jim, how can people get in touch with you?
Yep, absolutely. So the email is jim@familyenrichmentacademy.com. And so obviously the website address as well as familyenrichmentacademy.com. So they can reach out via either of those. And something else I might throw out, I've got a free resource for parents with teenagers. We talked about connection a lot. And one of the biggest complaints is, my teenager won't talk to me, right? They won't open up and talk. And I always like to say, well, part of the issue is you need to ask better questions, right? That's the part of the solution. And so I have this resources, 10 questions you should never ask your teenager. And think of these as like conversation killers. And then I've got 10 great questions. Those are the ones that tend to open up the conversations. And again, it's a free resource. It's available right on the homepage of the website. You can go there and download it. So I always encourage parents to check it out as well. And just check out our other content also.
Fantastic. Well, look, want to thank you for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule to share with the Dad Central Soul family. If there's anything that we can do to help you and helping families and helping dads and the kids, please feel free to touch base with us. But thanks again for your time.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Take care.
Thank you, Jim.
All right. Jim was on it.
Absolutely. Again, it's the beauty of being able to have conversations with people who are further ahead than you are. Jim's 6 kids, 13 grandchildren. He's been there, done that, and is guiding his own children to do that. And so I just think that's the value of having a community of people who are, ahead of you, or even at the same place where you can share and learn and grow from each other. And so that, for me, was a big part of that conversation. I learned a ton. So thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Lots of good stuff learned from there. And I love his approach, love-based approach. I think that is really important. And also him stressing that, dads, if you don't have it in your dads, he gave some really practical things on how dads can take that first, make a decision and take that first step. So it was really, really good conversation today. As always, we want you to touch base with us. Best way is email podcast@dadcentral.ca. Also, the podcast website, dadcentral.ca/podcast. And then website, we've got lots of resources too, dadcentral.ca. is also our website. And let's close up by saying, as always, the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. So they always like to say thank you for your support. Keep on connecting with us. Share the word, provide comments, and we will soon see you soon. Always remember to give yourself grace, and don't just manage your time, manage your energy. We'll see you soon. Take care.